Have you ever been in a situation where you needed a large sum of money but didn't know where to get it? Then, all of a sudden, an opportunity arrived, seemingly out of nowhere. It may seem odd, but who would say no when all you have to do is accept the offer to be locked in a library that only operates at midnight? Well, I am Mallorie Jones, and allow me to tell you a story. It was one fine afternoon. I was watching my Aunt Jane in her hospital room. She had just survived a heart attack, and at that time, I was waiting for the doctor's verdict about her condition if it had gotten worse than the last time. Yes, it wasn't the first time Aunt Jane had survived a heart attack, but I'm afraid it had affected her health a lot this time. I watched her sleep peacefully. Her face was serene despite the pain she must have been feeling. My heart ached for her. Aunt Jane had always been a beacon of kindness and compassion, with the purest soul and the gentlest heart. She had given so much to others, yet life had repaid her with hardship and suffering. It felt deeply unfair, almost cruel. At 17, I still grappled with the harsh realities of life. It seemed that those who embodied goodness and selflessness, like Aunt Jane, were the ones burdened with the greatest struggles. It was a paradox I couldn't wrap my head around. Why was it that the most deserving of happiness often faced the most adversity? As I sat by Aunt Jane's bedside, with my thoughts drifting far away, a soft knock came at the door. Startled, I turned to see a nurse peeking in. Her face was calm, yet sympathetic. I would like to ask her to come in, but she doesn't seem like she would be staying long. "Excuse me," she whispered. I moved my head to give her my full attention. "Dr. Armstrong wants to see you in his office," she continued, softly, then smiled at me. Relief and worry washed over me. I smiled back at her, but I knew that didn't reach my ears. Part of me was relieved that finally I would be hearing from Aunt Jane's cardiologist, and then another part of me was worried that I might get some news that would make me crumble. I internally sighed, then secretly collected my composure. I felt like I needed my full strength when I came to see Dr. Armstrong. After a few moments of silence, I nodded to the nurse, signaling my understanding of what she had just relayed to me. Then I paid one last glance at Aunt Jane before I stood from my seat and followed the nurse out of the room. My heart pounded with each step as we made our way through the quiet, sterile hallways of the hospital. The nurse led me to a door with a mark, "Dr. William Armstrong, cardiologist," and gestured for me to enter. I obediently followed. Inside, Dr. Armstrong sat behind a cluttered desk, his expression serious but not unkind. He motioned for me to sit and I sank into the chair opposite him, bracing myself for whatever news he had to deliver. "Thank you for coming, Mallorie. Sorry to call you in, as I do not want your aunt to hear what I'm about to share with you," Dr. Armstrong began. And I almost choked on my throat as I felt like I would only be hearing nothing but bad news. I was speechless. I didn't know what to say. Then we both fell into a short, awkward silence, before Dr. Armstrong cleared his throat. "I've reviewed Jane's latest results, and we need to discuss her condition and the options we have since you're the only closest family she has," he continued. He might have noticed my stunned silence. I was at a loss for words. My mind started thinking something I shouldn't be thinking. It was worse, and I couldn't help it. He took a deep breath, and I felt my stomach clench. "Her heart condition has worsened," he revealed. Then he looked at me with a pitiful gaze. The corners of my eyes instantly moistened. I hadn't prepared myself for what I was about to hear from him. Yet, I needed to keep myself together, as I needed to be strong for Aunt Jane. Just like how she has done for me all this time since my parents left me in her care. "How bad is her condition, Doc?" I managed to ask, then I drifted my gaze down to the carpeted floor, as I felt a tear fall from my left eye. "We're looking at a severe case of heart failure, Mallorie. We need to consider some urgent treatments, possibly even a transplant, to improve her chances." Dr. Armstrong remarked. I was shocked. I felt like the room was spinning, and I was in the center. A transplant? The word reverberated in my mind, sending a wave of fear and uncertainty crashing over me. The enormity of the situation hit me hard. Not only was the cost of such a procedure astronomical, far beyond anything we could afford, but we also faced the daunting task of finding a suitable donor. The sheer complexity and urgency of it all felt overwhelming to me. I tried to find my voice to ask for other options, but before I could speak my mind, Dr. Armstrong took the liberty of speaking again. I know this is a lot to take in, he added, his voice somewhat softening. We'll do everything we can to help Jane, but we need to act quickly. I'll give you some time to think about it. I was speechless and couldn't do anything but nod numbly, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. As I left his office, my mind raced with thoughts of how to come up with the money we needed. We may have some savings, but not nearly enough. I'm afraid that wouldn't even suffice to cover Aunt Jane's initial medical bills. Lost in my train of thought, I walked back to Aunt Jane's room. I couldn't shake the feeling of hopelessness reigning over me. How could we possibly get the money in time? And what if it wasn't enough? What if we couldn't find a heart donor? What should we do next? I was having quite a self-debate as I strolled. Reaching the end of the hallway, I suddenly felt a bizarre sensation creeping through me, causing my train of thought to derail and me to become aware of my surroundings. It was then that I noticed a figure standing at the end of the hallway. At first, I thought it was a tall, shadowy figure shrouded in an aura of mystery. Then I scrunched my eyes, thinking it might have been just a trick of the harsh fluorescent lights above. Almost immediately, I confirmed that it was just a trick of the lights as I now saw an old man, wearing a dark, old-fashioned suit with a shiny black wooden cane in his left hand. And as I got closer to him, I accidentally looked into his eyes. Then I instantly felt awkward by the way he was staring at me. I couldn't explain exactly, but his eyes seemed cold and devoid of any emotions. Something in him screamed somewhat eerie to me. To give myself ample distance from him, I slightly moved to the other side of the hallway so that when I took my turn, I wouldn't stumble on him. Then afterward, I averted my attention and looked down at my shoes, obviously avoiding his creepy gaze. When I finally managed to take my turn and walked past him, I released a sigh of relief. Whew! That was the longest 3 minutes of my life, I thought to myself and continued walking, heading to Aunt Jane's room. However, I hadn't even gone 4 steps when the mysterious old man spoke. You looked distressed, child, he said. His voice was as cold as his eyes. I was frozen. I'm not sure if he's talking to me, but I'm assuming he really was, as there was no one around, but just the two of us. I slowly turned and found him already pivoted from his original position and was now facing me. Cold, clammy sweats immediately graced my forehead, and my entirety was shivering. Are you talking to me? I mustered to ask while pointing at myself, despite the oddity of the situation. He didn't reply right away, but just gave me a curious, knowing smile. I frowned at his reaction. What was that all about? I internally noted, not tearing my eyes at him. I can feel you're worrying about something. He spoke again, not answering my inquiry, then stalled a little. And someone, am I right? He added. His words sent a shiver down my spine. How could he possibly know that I was worried? I hesitated, unsure whether to engage or just walk away. Something about him really felt off, but my curiosity got the better of me. I don't know what you're talking about, mister, I hummed, trying to maintain a calm facade. But I was sure I failed miserably. The old man gently chuckled. The sound was oddly comforting, yet unsettling. There's no need to pretend, young lady, he said in a hushed voice. I can see the burden you're carrying. A loved one, perhaps? Probably someone in need of help? I swallowed hard, and my throat suddenly ran dry. The way he spoke made it seem like he knew more about my situation than he should have. I was torn between the urge to run and the strange pull to stay and listen. Who are you? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The old man's smile widened slightly, then he inclined his head in a small bow. I'm just someone who understands the weight of difficult choices, he replied cryptically. And perhaps someone who can offer a solution to your predicament. A solution? I echoed, skepticism creeping into my voice. What do you mean by that? He didn't reply. He just fished something inside his suit's pocket. And when he got it, he quickly extended his free hand to me, trying to hand me a business card, which I unawarely accepted. Come see me anytime. I have a job opening that pays a handsome amount of salary, he announced, then turned on his heel and walked away from me, leaving me stunned and unmoving from where I was standing. He didn't even wait for me to respond. Or at least allowed me to clarify some things. Well, what's there to clarify in the first place? I thought to myself, while feeling the tiny paper he handed me over. Out of curiosity, I examined the business card in my hand and saw the words "The Midnight Library" and an address underneath it. Nothing more. I stared at it for quite some time, feeling a strange mixture of curiosity and unease. The Midnight Library? I repeated in a questioning tone. It sounded like something out of a fantasy novel, or a spooky theme for Halloween. Either or, it does seem out of the ordinary. I looked up, hoping to see the old man again, but he had already disappeared down the hallway, leaving me with more questions than answers. As I stood there, contemplating the odd encounter, a thought struck me. What if this was the solution I had been desperately searching for right now? The offer was actually suspicious, but, with Aunt Jane's situation growing more dire by the day, I couldn't afford to dismiss any opportunity, even with how odd and random it may seem.